Uh, okay, thank you everybody for coming to this webinar. Uh, my name is ShriKant, and I have around 20 years of experience in IT industry, around 10 years in agile software development. And this particular webinar is focused towards DevOps for executives. Before I start this webinar, I just want to do some housekeeping stuff. So first of all, it will be great that everybody goes on mute so that and I mean people don't hear the disturbance. Second is I mean there will be a Q&A section. I mean after the webinar is over, so that will be around 15 minutes, and you'll be able to ask any and every questions. So what you can do is you can put your questions in a Q&A section, and I will read those questions and basically answer those questions. Fine. So as and when basically you have any issues which you think can be discussed at that point of time, then definitely we can discuss there. In case you feel that something is really you need to ask immediately, then you can ask that as well. Fine, but it will be preferred that if we have a discussion after the session is over. So I think the first question which comes in everybody's mind is that why a deck for the executives or the leaders? And so the so that so the question so when it comes to DevOps, then I hope you must have heard a lot of buzzword around it. And uh, what I've seen in my experience while working with multiple teams and organizations, that there is a lot of confusion in terms of what is it all about, and I mean as a leader, what can be our role in it. Fine. At the same time, I'm also not sure that developers also understand what's their role in DevOps actually, because whatever I have seen, it is more like a myth rather than the reality. So the point of this discussion is to make sure that unless we look at the holistic picture, we may be doing the DevOps in the silos. So for example, you can say that I am uh, I'm doing DevOps in the operation department, which doesn't mean anything, for example. Similar, so that is the antithesis of the DevOps itself. Fine. Other thing is that people may be thinking that it is all about code, but there are a lot more things around it other than code. So another expectation I want to make sure is that I mean, if you look at the entire content which needs to be discussed, it will take around 1 day or 2 days. I mean, in details. So what we are trying to do in this webinar is to first of all give you the holistic picture, and then dig deeper in one part of it. Fine. So that's how we can do the justice within this time. So let's try to see what DevOps we see from I mean in our from our eyes, and see if this is myth or the reality. So generally, first question uh, what people see is that um, I mean at some point of time they must be doing agile project development, so they may be implementing Scrum, Kanban, or extreme programming. But now all of a sudden everybody comes with a DevOps idea, and then somebody says, okay, we are implementing DevOps. So you see, uh, I mean, some people are doing agile, some people are doing DevOps. I mean, is that the right thing or is that the right understanding? So uh, so the point is that if you look at the holistic definition of DevOps, it's the kind of uh, from the people standpoint, it's a close collaboration between development and operations. So that means they are working in a collaborative fashion together towards one business goal. So instead of so if you think it little bit more from the agile standpoint, so we talk about definition of done, and generally the definition of done from agile standpoint is that you take this the user stories or the work in your backlog and basically implement it toward up to the production. So that becomes a kind of definition of done for us. But the point is that beyond that, I mean, the point is, I mean, you are creating the features, but uh, in that whole value stream, there is an important part of deployment and monitoring as well. So just saying that we are done, I mean, it doesn't send the product in front of the end user. So unless the end user can use it, then whatever you may be creating may be the inventory. Fine. So the point is that what about we extend the definition of done beyond creating the feature up to production. Fine. So that's where the operations also come into picture. So they do the deployment, they do the monitoring. So now instead of limiting your definition of done up to creating the feature for up to production, now you are able to deploy it as well and monitor it as well in a collaborative fashion. Fine. So sometimes whenever you find a discussion that we are doing agile, we are doing DevOps, then something is wrong there. So I mean, in the DevOps team, everybody, including the developer, is a DevOps member. Fine. So it's a kind of extension of agile. Then another thing which you may see, which is quite prevalent these days, is that somebody who is doing continuous integration or continuous delivery, infrastructure as code, test-driven development, or any kind of other automation, then he says, I'm doing DevOps. I mean, is it really the DevOps? Because if you look at continuous integration, continuous delivery, they have been integral part of agile folklore for a long time. Fine. Same goes for test-driven development and behavior-driven development. Fine. Another thing which is about infrastructure as a code is important. I mean, it is important, but it's not entirely DevOps is all about. So if you are doing the infrastructure as a code in isolation, that means as part of the operation team, and you are not doing I mean, working in a collaborative fashion together with the development team then definitely you're not doing DevOps. Fine. So let's move here now. Let's see. I mean, this picture may also be quite relevant here, where I mean, in a staffing a discussion, a manager says that let's include five DevOps resources. First of all, I entirely disagree with the term resources, but this is how basically this discussion really happens. Fine. And or we require a DevOps team to do this work. So again, this is, I mean, if you, whatever I have discussed so far, you may be able to understand here that DevOps team is not a separate team. So saying that we are having 5 DevOps resources, it just means that we are having 5 operations people as part of our team, and it looks like because they are saying that in this way, then they may be working in isolation, not in a very collaborative way with the development team. Fine. So these are the kind of myths which are quite prevalent in the industry, at least whatever I've seen in India. Um, so, but if you see in from the holistic standpoint, it is not what it is. So let's move on to a little bit history of DevOps. Fine. So so it's basically started from a presentation which happened in the Velocity 2009 conference. This presentation is an historic presentation and was done by a operations vice president of Flickr, and at the same time a technology leader or development leader from Yahoo. So this was quite a phenomena where the both uh, people from the ops and dev were giving a presentation together for the I mean, so it was a kind of very rare phenomena. And at that point of time, instead of saying that we will do the deployment once in a 2 weeks, once in a month, once in a quarter, they were really talking about 10 plus deployment per day. And from that time perspective, this was a historic event because nobody really could understand how it could be possible. So this presentations started it, and someone who was part of um, who was part of this presentation basically uh, I mean, created a DevOps Days conference in Belgium, 2009, and from that point onwards, the name was DevOps. So before that, DevOps name was not there at all. So with that history, let's see what is DevOps. So DevOps, I mean, I'm just trying to give you different versions uh, from different perspectives. So one is like DevOps is a combination of the cultural philosophies, practices, and tools that increases an organization's ability to deliver applications and services at high velocity. Another point is evolving and improving products at a faster pace than organizations using traditional software development and infrastructure management processes. Uh, so I mean, so first of all, we need to understand that. I mean, if when we are talking about the cultural philosophies, practices, and tools, so DevOps takes a lot more than what Agile does. So I will discuss it a little bit in the further slides. So I mean, you will find it is more than Agile because it takes a lot of ideas from different fields. So if you see here that instead of ops working in isolation, dev working in isolation, this is a collaborative work together. So I think first of all, I just want to make sure that everybody understand this point, that irrespective of whether you are doing the automation or not doing the automation, if you are not working collaboratively, you are not working together. So what I've seen is that even so, like for example, if I mean, the Jenkins installation is done by some guy, and some that person is called that he's part of the DevOps team. So just a moment. Okay. Yeah. So there are some questions, and yeah. So this recording will be there. Okay. Yeah, recording will be there. Yeah, definitely. So let's move on. So what I was saying is that before you really think that whether we are doing some automation or not, first of all, you need to see whether we are working together. If you're not working together, then whatever you call it is not DevOps. Fine. So working collaboratively, work towards one business goal is the first and important criteria to do the DevOps. And then definitely, I mean, automation helps. So before understanding, before getting into the automation and all that, first of all, let's try to understand uh, what is the need of the automation, what exactly we are trying to do with this whole DevOps and stuff. Why they, I mean, why exactly this uh, automation was not there before and things like that. So let's try. So let's see the need of the DevOps. Fine. So so what happened was that if you talk about a development, software development, then it really evolved from 1990s onwards, and you see the Scrum, Kanban, extreme programming practices. Lots of automations I mean, took place over there. So if you see in this, it progressed in a leaps and bound. And earlier at one point of time we were delivering once in a year. Now we were delivering maybe once in a week. Fine. But if you see the operations still remained there. Most of the stuff was in the head of the system administrators, their personal scripts and all that. So and most of the work was manual based on the instructions given in the document. Fine. So from that standpoint, the operations part did not really evolve. Okay, and because of that, uh, you see a lot of differences. So you may say that, okay, I'm able to give you the features in 1 week, but you may see that the deployment still to the production still takes, for example, a week or so. Fine. So you're not able to deploy it immediately, or sometimes in certain organizations deployment happens once in a quarter, once in a. So if you see the entire, so you may be able to create your features from sprint by sprint standpoint, but then what happens is that to the production it really goes once in a quarter or once in a release, that kind of stuff. So that was because of these reasons that the automation didn't really happen, or a lot of engineering practices which we used as part of the development, software development, did not go to the operations. So second part is the core chronic conflict. This is this I mean, so first of all, I just want to introduce Ali Goldratt, who is has been a key influence on the DevOps movement. Ali Goldratt has written a book called The Goal, which has been very renowned, and um, it introduces the theory of constraints, and it basically influenced a lot of ideas, including DevOps, in the software industry, and has been it was part of the manufacturing industry to begin with in 1984 and 1985. So he introduced this concept called core chronic conflict, and the idea is that when organizations' measurements and incentives across different silos prevent the achievement of the global organization goals. Fine. So you maybe have different incentives for your silo, that means for your operations, and for different incentives for development, and then there will be a conflict over there. So let's try to understand that with this slide. So you see From the development standpoint, the goal or the incentive is by rapidly, taking risk to achieve their goals, rapidly changing competitive landscapes, and basically uh, churning out features as much as possible. Fine. Creating the features. But at the same time, operations provide the stable, reliable, and secure services, and it tries to avoid risk to achieve their goal. And you see that there is a conflict between the dev and ops. Now, um, if you try to see this conflict, then one of the reason why it generally happens is because you if there is a huge amount of work to be deployed, then definitely it will be a risk. Fine. So what do you do in that case? So in such cases, basically, people try to go towards the continuous integration philosophy, and this is about, like, if it is hard to do something, you are not doing it often enough. And another part is, if delta is small, so is the risk. So the continuous integration, the idea was that instead of integrating once in a while, maybe once in a month or once in a 2 months, um, which creates a lot of issues from the integration point of view. What about if you integrate your features with every commit? And in case there are any issues from the functional standpoint, you fix them as soon as they come. Fine. So if you think about this philosophy, it is all about, instead of giving a huge batch of the work towards the end and having a lot of issues to fix, if you basically have a small delta, then the amount of issues will be very small. Fine. So instead of deploying a lot many features in a big bang way, what about you deploy them as and when they are produced or they are ready for production? um, and uh, and in order to do that, the ops required a lot of automation, and that's where the whole idea of the infrastructure as code came into picture, in which the whole infrastructure became code and was part of the repositories, version control systems, and not in the head of some system administrator. So with that idea, uh, instead of dealing one system administrator per 10 servers, now people have been handling thousands of servers by one system administrator. Fine. So as you see, the idea of the continuous integration can be applied anywhere. So in case you're having some trouble and you're doing it once in a while, that means that the problem it can be fixed by just doing it often enough. Right. So that was the idea of to fix the core chronic conflict. Before I go towards the theory of constraints, let me try to introduce the body of knowledge DevOps draw upon. Fine. So, uh, so first of all, I think before we get into the body of knowledge, I think we understand what with the DevOps what we are trying to do. We are trying to reduce the lead time uh, to go to the production. So the idea of the lead time is that the request of a feature is given, and then it is deployed on the production for a user to use. Fine. So by in the time taken to create a request, from the time you create a request and that is deployed in the production, that is the lead time. Fine. And that lead time may contain a lot of things. So for example, maybe requirement analysis, some of the require some of the I mean uh, discussions with the stakeholders and things like that, and So the point is that you're trying to reduce this whole time towards going to the production. Fine. And in doing that, you try to focus in limiting the amount taken by the development, at the same time taken by the operations. Fine. Uh, Another point is that apart from basically automating stuff at the operations side, you want to make sure that whatever the operations is deploying is safe. When I talk about the safe, being safe, that means any kind of you should be able to deal with any kind of outages. So you might have seen the examples of Flipkart not able to deal with the extra load when the Xiaomi phone was introduced in the Flipkart side. So that was a bad example of not having the safe systems. But at the same time, if you look at Amazon, you look at Google or the Netflix, they basically take it as part of their system, and as part of their drills, they regularly delete their data centers. Uh, using Chaos Monkey, and try to see how to deal with that kind of situation on a regular basis. Fine. So basically, that's where the safety comes into pictures. That whatever you're deploying is safe. You are able to monitor. You are able to provide the services to the customers on a regular basis. So if you look at it, then in order to make sure that you have you are able to reduce the bottlenecks and remove them, uh, and basically have a continuous flow from the request given to the to the team, and it is deployed in production. Then that's where basically the theory of constraint comes into picture, and this was introduced as in the book called Goal by the Ali Goldrich. Similarly, there has been influence of lean manufacturing, and that is Toyota Production Systems on the DevOps. So when you talk about the value or the value stream, so before you try to understand, in order to try to understand where the bottleneck is in your value stream, you try to basically do the value stream mapping. Value stream mapping is all about like what are the different steps taken from the time the request is given and up to the time uh, it is deployed in the production, and then see where, depending on the time taken in each step, where the bottleneck is. So that value stream mapping concept comes in from the lean manufacturing. Similarly, the idea of the value of comes from the lean as well. Another concept, flow, is also part of the lean uh, manufacturing. So the idea is that the idea of the flow is that I mean you should be able to remove any kind of bottlenecks and have a flow, you think about it in a way that you are going on a smooth road, and that is a good flow. And then another is there are a lot of um, I mean uh, lot of problems on the road, and that's where there are bottlenecks, and that is not a good flow. So the idea of the flow comes from the lean manufacturing again. Many ideas from the lean concept have been taken by from um, Deming. So Deming was a kind of key founder of the lean philosophy because he went to Japan and introduced TQM concepts, and from them we are also taking system thinking. So instead of thinking work in isolation, you are thinking the work as a whole. So you are not saying that okay, we are able to improve our efficiency from the development standpoint, but that is all we can do. If you're thinking in that way, then maybe you're thinking in a localized way or the siloed way. But if you're thinking that we are able to make the improvement, but the holistic improvement is not taking place, then how can we help? Then that may be a little bit more systemic and global thinking. Uh, then another point is the safety culture, which I introduced as earlier. It is called resilience engineering or the human factors. This one of the key contributor towards it is as Dr. Sidney Dragdecker. Uh, Another point is learning organizations. So the point is that uh, I mean, apart from whatever you are creating and deploying to the production, you need to learn every day with the market. So so one of the key idea is that either you are a learning organization or you are losing to one who is fine. So there are a lot of characteristics of the learning organization and how it really works. So if you look at the entire DevOps phenomena, so this is a combination of multiple philosophies here. So in this presentation, I would introduce the idea of the theory of constraints, the idea of the bottlenecks, how to resolve them, and just to make sure that the idea of the bottleneck is relevant in your day-to-day work as well. Fine. So, for example, like somebody is, I mean, some person, the key person in your team is overloaded. So he's a kind of bottleneck in towards the success of your project, for example. So how to help him out? How to remove that bottleneck? So you can take certain ideas from the theory of constraints to resolve that. Fine. So let me introduce you to the theory of constraints. So let's if you see that this picture gives you I mean a sketch of a value stream, which you get the idea from sales, and it is I mean it comes with engineering and product management and account management, and it goes to production. Fine. So in this whole value stream, the flow happens from left to right. Um, so so the if in any flow of the work there is a direction of the flow, but there is one and only one bottleneck. uh, any improvement not made at the bottleneck is an illusion. So sometimes you see that fine, I mean, even though you are doing a lot of improvement from your performance standpoint, I mean, uh, from the efficiency standpoint of your technical team, but then it doesn't have much impact on the whole cycle to move to the production. So the point is that apart from engineering, there may be other bottlenecks as well. Uh, I mean, you may be improving, for example, 2 or 3 hours by your efficiency, but the bigger bottleneck, for example, 30 days, may be lying somewhere else. So if you are making improvement on the bottleneck, other than the bottleneck, so for example, you're making the improvement only on the engineering side, then it will give you the illusion for an improvement, but not a real improvement. So one of the example I will just try to give is that it comes from the book Goal, and so one of the character in this book, Alex, is running to the airport and meets the physics professor Jonah, who is the incarnation of Dr. Goldrich. And he has a discussion with him that he's presenting a talk to in the conference, presenting how robots improved my efficiency. So then Jonah asks, how? I mean, you said like it improved your efficiency 36%. Are you selling 36% more products? No, no, we are manufacturing organization. Oh, okay. So did you lay off 36% people from your organization? No, no. So the point is that if you have not increased your sales 36% or you decrease your cost by 36%, you have not improved your efficiency at all. In fact, your inventory level might be going to the roof. So so the point is here is that, like, if you see that, I mean, even though from the automation standpoint he was trying to make some improvement from in the efficiency, but if it has no impact from the business outcome, then it gives you the illusion of the efficiency improvement. Fine. So another point is that only way to improve efficiency is to increase throughput or sales and decrease cost. Otherwise, you are just increasing work in process. Another important point which Colruyt said was a minute lost on the constraint is the minute lost on the entire system. So one of the event in the goal was that I mean, heat treat oven goes down in the goal, and at that point of time it's not 12 hours per hour you are paying to the worker. It is actually $20,000 per hour, because it is basically like every worker is now idle. Fine. So if because of the bottleneck nothing is really working, so you're not just spending $12 per hour for that worker, but because the entire value stream is stopped, so you are actually losing $20,000 per hour. And that's how basically one of the idea the Amazon basically looks at is, like, in case they are not able to have the performance of the page in a certain way, then they may be losing billions of dollars from the user standpoint. So with that, let's try to see what are the different constraints, how the constraint really moves. Because what generally happens is if you fix the constraint, it moves to somewhere else. So let's try to see in the IT lifecycle how the constraint really moves in a predictable way. So first and foremost thing is the environment creation. Sometimes you might have seen that in case you are working on different branches, and each branch has its own environment, then you are basically and basically it has dependency on other systems. So then basically environment creation itself takes a huge amount of time. You may not be able to get the data and things like that. So so first basically the constraint comes on the environment creation in the IT value stream. And what people do is that in order to have the predictable way to create the environment, they basically take the help of the automation or infrastructure as a code, using cloud, Puppet, Chef, virtualization, and Docker. So that is first constraint. Second is deployment. If you remove this constraint from the environment creation, it goes to deployment. Um, so there also, like the deployment, in case there are hundreds of steps in order to move the application to the production, then basically that may be a bottleneck there as well. Fine. So what about, like, instead of having 1,300 steps or 1,400 steps, you move to the single step deployment, then I mean, you can do the deployment safely, securely, and reliably. So the idea is that here as well, you automate as much as possible. After you move the constraint from deployment, you remove this constraint from deployment, it moves to testing. And testing is like, for example, if you're not doing the automation from the testing standpoint, then you may be taking a lot of time from the manual regression standpoint. Sometimes this whole testing takes multiple weeks before you go to the production. And so and also like there are problems because of getting the integrated test environment to test the components along with the dependencies. So again, the countermeasure is massively automating the test process, move towards unit testing instead of integration testing, uh, parallelizing the testing, uh, and test rate could keep up with the ideal deployment. Another important idea is trunk-based deployment, and the idea is that everybody really works on the trunk and not on any branch. In order to make it happen, it is important that your you have trust on your test automation, and you are able to use some kind of switch for your features in case you don't want them to go to production. So everybody works on the trunk. Everything from the trunk goes to the production. So you don't have any more multiple branches. Everybody is working in isolation. So that is also an idea where you can make the faster deployment of the production. The next, after you move uh, from the testing, the bottleneck goes to the architecture, and the symptom small change require the symptoms is that some small changes require permission from 50 different people. So it means that maybe I mean your application is has a tightly coupled architecture, and the small changes could translate into global catastrophes. So the countermeasure is that architecture should be as loosely coupled as possible. Small teams should independently develop and deploy where small changes cause small failures, not other way around. So that's how basically people use service-oriented architecture, domain-driven design, microservices, um, and yeah, so those kind of decoupling ways of doing things. So finally, the idea is that the bottleneck should be product owners. So the product owner becomes the bottleneck when he doesn't have enough good ideas to think about or basically move to the production. So when we talk about the ideas, we are really talking about the good ideas which could really help the the end users in his endeavor to do his job. So it's not any and every idea actually. So how many good ideas are worth testing with real life customers? So, so the idea is that the bottleneck should not be dev, QA, and operations. Bottleneck should be the creation of the good ideas. So one of the things which basically has been the key or component in first environment creation and deployment is the infrastructure as a code. So that is a key to the operations automation. So here the idea is that the managing your operations in the same way you do applications or other code for general release. So one of the things which basically came into picture here is that some of the core practices which were part of the development came here, like version control, virtualized tests, continuous monitoring. So a lot of work really went to the code and into the repositories, and people were not really having anything in their head only. Fine. So instead of one person having handling a couple of servers, now people are handling thousands of servers. I mean, right now, for example, I mean, when Instagrams was sold to Facebook, at that point of time, there were only two system administrators, and they were handling billions of users, actually, 1 billion users. So the basic principle is that operations should not log in to a new machine and configure it from documentation. Okay. So I think you get the idea is that, I mean, what we are trying to do here is with the theory of constraint is to basically remove the bottleneck so that the flow is smooth in the value stream. Whatever the work comes as a request goes to the production as soon as possible. So that is what we are trying to do to achieve with theory of constraint. So one of the idea is like sometimes what generally happens is whenever there is a bottleneck, I mean, people ask like, how should they fix the bottleneck? So for example, you have, I mean, you have a, I'll talk about the same problem that people, you have a one overloaded person in your team, and then what generally happens is immediately to resolve that bottleneck, what you think is what about we should have another person on board in our team, fine. So if you basically look at it from the theory of constraints point of view, that comes as the last step, fine. So before that last step, what are the different steps you should take to mitigate that constraint or the bottleneck? So this is the idea of the 5 focusing steps. So what you do is, first of all, you try to identify the constraint. So the fundamental inside the theory of constraint is the output of any system is determined by the one bottleneck. A chain is as strong as its weakest link. So if you want to make the chain stronger, we need to work on the weakest link. So at the start of the improvement process, the bottleneck is easy to spot, and a bottleneck resource is always busy. But busyness is not the only criteria by which you to recognize a bottleneck. Many systems are mistakenly optimized to get high utilizations, or rather busyness, out of all resources. So another thing with which you can recognize a bottleneck is work piles up in front of them. Downstream resources are regularly idle. Fine. So what do you do in this case? So you identify the bottleneck. So what do you do now? So next step is to exploit the bottleneck. So if the bottleneck of the output of the system is constrained by the output of the bottleneck, we must first try to increase the output of the bottleneck. Any idle time of the bottleneck reduces output of the system. So what should we do? So remove any non-value adding work, first of all. Second is remove or limit interruptions to the bottleneck. Remove impediments. Fine. So any kind of interruptions which are coming to him in this case should be removed. And also, like as I said, non-value added work should be removed. Let the bottleneck resource work at a steady pace. Provide high quality tools and materials so that he can optimize his time and work. Then carefully prioritize the bottleneck work so that they always work on the most important tasks. Ensure that there is always enough work to do for the team so that they don't become idle through lack of input. So with that, if you are done with that, how I mean, what is the next step which you do in case you are not able to resolve the bottleneck still? What do you do in that case? So next step is subordinate every other decision to the bottleneck. So when we have fully exploited the bottleneck, we must subordinate every other decision to our decision to exploit the bottleneck. All the resources that are not bottleneck have bottlenecks. All the resources that are not bottlenecks have by definition some slack time. So what you can do to subordinate is by letting the non-bottlenecks help the bottleneck or take over some required but low value adding work. Another is everybody works at the pace of the bottleneck, no faster, no slower, to avoid overloading the bottleneck with work in progress. So for example, your bottleneck is I mean it has a low speed. So if you have a person who is walking with a low speed, one way is that you basically run faster. With that, basically, I mean, that will not help anybody. Fine. So instead of that, what you do is you go with the pace of that bottleneck. So because that will not help any because in case you go faster, that will create more inventory in front of the bottleneck, and that will not solve any problems. So those after the bottlenecks ensure that they have some slack to deal with the variations in output of the bottleneck. So with that step, next step comes as the elevate the bottleneck. And so in case these three steps are not able to solve the problem, you come to the last step, as which is elevate the bottleneck, and that is the first step people generally take. Fine. So this is the first step most people will intuitively apply. Add more people, more machines, more training, more tools, more of everything. So we only take this step when all the free improvements have been performed. So we can elevate by adding more people or machines, training and mentoring, better tools, faster machines, switching to a different technology. And then basically you repeat this step again. So this is basic. So if you look at it, I mean, this is a kind of generic way to manage the bottleneck. And this bottleneck can be in your Kanban board as well. So for example, if you have your Kanban board, developers are creating a lot of features, and there is a bottleneck, which is a tester at that point of time. So how do you help or solve that bottleneck or resolve that bottleneck? So you can perform all these 5 steps and see that is resolved or not. Sometimes people say that, I mean, in case there is a bottleneck in the Kanban, then you try to resolve it together. But then when it comes together, nobody tells you like what is the mechanics to solve or work together to resolve the bottleneck. And that's where this 5 focusing steps really help. Fine. So basically with this these ideas, I try to give you some ideas like how to remove the bottleneck whichever is lying in your DevOps pipeline, uh, which is hampering your speed from moving from the idea to the production, to idea to cache, and theory of constraint really helps towards that. So with that, I mean, this one of the feature of the DevOps is finished, and now I'm open to questions. So is a guy for operations, there are some questions over here. So is a guy for operations necessarily part of agile team? Yes, he can be part of the agile team, no problems. Lots of operations people are part of the agile team these days. Guys, okay, so this is next one is there any role for the project manager in DevOps? Agile DevOps is related each other. So as I said, DevOps is an extension of Agile only. So the basic idea of Agile is to work in a collaborative cross-functional way. DevOps extended to the operations as well. So they are related by default. Fine. As far as the role of the manager is concerned, I mean, what I've seen is that some kind of coordination is required when you have multiple teams, and that's where some kind of program manager role helps. But as far as the individual teams are concerned, it is sufficient to have the Scrum Masters. Rapid Agile is DevOps. So actually, I think, as I said, like we are extending Agile beyond the definition of done up to the production. We are really going from the idea to cache. Fine. So we're not just saying that we are done as soon as our feature is done. We are we want to basically deploy into production, and then we want to have the validated feedback, validated learning from the market. So with that learning, we can see whether our feature or the idea is working or not. In case it's not working, then we that is a kind of feedback to the product backlog, and we basically improve the product backlog further to make sure that those whatever the feedback is coming from the production environment is taken care of. So when we are saying the feedback is it's not just I mean, we're not talking about the bugs. We are really talking about whether people are using the feature or not, and I mean, are there any kind of feedback from their standpoint, things like that, and then basically we based on those inputs, we basically improve the backlog. Is Team Foundation server can be integrated with the DevOps? See, all these I mean, TFS is a tool. So TFS is a tool can be used anywhere. So DevOps, as I said, is not something related to technical stuff. So it's a way of doing things to make the idea to cache time shorter. So so TFS, if you want to use it anywhere, it's just a tool. It's just like another tool. You can use it anywhere, no problems. Employee worked in Agile can be into DevOps. So in case, as I said, in one of the idea is that in case you are working using DevOps philosophies, then every team member is part of the DevOps, including a developer, tester, or whoever. So that is a kind of myth when we say that, oh, you are a DevOps person. There is no DevOps person at all. Fine. In case you're doing DevOps, the entire organization or entire team does the DevOps. It's not just the one person or individual people do the DevOps. DevOps is just a framework or technology. As I said, like it's a way of thinking. I mean, to make sure that you reduce the time from idea to cache, then ability to make sure that you whatever you're doing deploying is safe with any kind of outages. Then another is that you are learning continuously. So so it's not basically a technology, definitely, but it is a set of thinking to for attaining these goals. Okay, so then what pipeline tools can be used for DevOps? You can use any kind of pipeline. You can use Jenkins, you can use TeamCity, you can use anything. So whatever the pipeline tools are, I mean these days a lot of pipeline tools are available. So you search for Google and you'll find tons of them, no problems. Who can play the major role in DevOps? So as I mean, one of the things which we might have seen is that I mean, um, it's not like you are trying to remove the localized bottleneck. So some bottleneck within the team or some things like that. Sometimes the bottleneck lies across the teams. So for example, you have the dependency on another team, and they are becoming the bottlenecks. So in that at that point of time, that there is a great amount of responsibilities on the leadership to resolve those bottlenecks. So in case they are working basically on their own and focusing on their teams only, then again you are not doing DevOps at all, because DevOps is all about thinking holistically and working from overarching business goals. So so in case there is any bottleneck lies anywhere, that should be resolved, and that's where the role of the leadership is very, very important. DevOps is nothing but cross-functional agile team. Correct. So, so I think DevOps. You can say DevOps team is the cross-functional agile team. But then, as far as DevOps itself is concerned, you might have found, based on my answer so far, it is much more than that. It's not just a team, but there is a goal of what needs to be done by using DevOps, and there are certain ideas and principles to help you in doing that. Okay, so this comes under iterative and incremental methods model in SDLC. So it's a kind of extension of Agile. So you continue to work in Agile or Scrum way, but only thing is that instead of thinking in a localized way, you think as a whole. You think from the system thinking standpoint. You think towards the business goals. Are you attaining them or not? And in order to move there, you try to resolve um, the bigger bottlenecks as well. So can you suggest a free tool for the pipeline in DevOps? You can. I mean, pipeline tools. You can use Jenkins is free, and people have been using a lot the Jenkins these days. Is there something better than DevOps? What is its successor? I think sometimes I mean, before we really move to its successor, it is important that we at least understand what DevOps is all about. What I have just covered is just I mean 10% part of it. Fine, there is a lot more to it, and a lot of ideas which have been taken into place in the world, like lean startup. People are embracing those ideas in the DevOps world as well. So so I don't want to say that there is something more than that, more than DevOps right now, because DevOps itself is evolving as of now. What do we consider that when we are hiring DevOps? Do check algorithmic skills? As I said, like I think what you mean is what should we look at from hiring operations people, because there is no DevOps people. So I mean, we need to be very clear. There is no DevOps team, DevOps people. What you're trying to say is that maybe operations people who are able to do the automation. So 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 don't confuse the operations people with the DevOps people. Right? So so DevOps only happen when you are working in a collaborative fashion, from idea to cash. Fine, and sometimes in a vendor team that may not be possible. Fine, so so even though you may think that you are working in as a DevOps, but that is automation and things like that are not or not just DevOps. So what are the prerequisites to learn the DevOps? I think what again you mean is that what are the prerequisites to learn the infrastructure as a code? So again, you can learn the DevOps as the philosophies by reading books, but as far as if you're looking at from the automation standpoint, then there are different kind of automation infrastructure as a code, like using Chef and Puppet. Um, and there may be automation in terms of the development as well, so you can do that anyways. So there are no prerequisites if you're looking for from the automation standpoint, but again, as I said, that is not DevOps, it is just operations automation. Any example of DevOps implementation for a particular business? I mean, you may see the different implementations are Amazon, Google, so there ING Bank, so that has been implemented completely DevOps. Another bank is, I mean, there are multiple banks which are working from the DevOps point of view these days. So there are a lot of examples. what is the role, responsibility day to day of the DevOps engineer from IT operations perspective? So if a operations engineers from the engineer's point of view, it will be important how he is contributing. There are multiple things. One is like to make sure that the deployment environment creation happens in one single click. For example, there is a lot of automations happening over there. Whenever there is any kind of bottlenecks lying within the uh, DevOps pipeline, then he may be trying to help the team over there. So with his ideas and things like that. So apart from doing his own work, I mean, in making sure that the time taken from the operation standpoint is very little, he needs to help and work together with the development team. uh, DevOps is SDLC in a loop, right? Basically you go from the idea to production, then there is a feedback comes back to you, and based on the feedback you basically evolve uh, your ideas, your uh, so with that, why DevOps is not used widely in industry? I think people have been using DevOps a lot these days. So if you are hearing like you are doing the deployment, I mean the problem which generally happens is that uh, if you are working in a legacy in a organization which basically has been using applications for a long time, so those applications may be legacy applications where you have issues from the test automation point of view and operations automation point of view. So they may be having the existing issues, but the point is that everybody tries to move towards the goal where they are able to deploy multiple times a day. So that's where they basically start, they define the goal and they start from there. Only thing is that um, unless people have that kind of culture where they are trying to resolve the problems collaboratively. So for example, if you think that, I mean, our goal, my team role is to make sure that I am just creating the features. If there are any issues in multiple teams, then I don't really care. So in case that, I mean, but even though I know that I can help to resolve those issues, and but I will not resolve those issues. So what generally happens is when the leadership doesn't know like what is their role in the DevOps, uh, uh, I mean, how what role they have to resolve the conflicts or the bottlenecks, and there is no mechanism or the governance in doing that, then basically DevOps doesn't really works. I mean, even the Agile doesn't work. You may be having the lots of examples where lots of enterprises are doing the enterprise result transformation, but in case the mindset still there, the same, then nothing really moves. I have seen certain organizations which are doing it for 5 or 6 years, but they are still the same. And Any video for sample application implementation DevOps. So application implementation, I think again what you mean is that if we can implement Chef and Puppet on an application and try the operation automation over there. So there must be a lot of applications available. I don't have immediately with me, but if you try to find on the internet, you will find them, how to do the automation using Chef and Puppet on any application. And then is DevOps can be used with in SAP? I personally don't have a very good understanding about SAP, so I cannot comment on that. So sorry about that. Uh, I, is there any other question from anybody? People can take the mic and speak as well in case they want. So DevOps only main is collaboration. I think the collaboration is the beginning point, fine. But the idea, as I said, is to, so with that collaboration, what do? You try to remove the bottlenecks within that pipeline, fine. And how to basically use, how to remove the bottlenecks, and maybe using the theory of constraints and lean ideas. So so if you see that collaboration is a kind of prerequisite to start, but that is not the only thing about DevOps. That is just the beginning. So the idea is to basically minimize the time taken from idea to cache. So collaboration plus lean. So I think I'll just show you again the key ideas of the DevOps. So if you see here, there are multiple things: theory of constraints, learning organization, safety culture, um, system thinking, lean manufacturing. So all these things are part of the DevOps. Should automation tester actively involve and learn DevOps? Automation tester may already be is already in a part of the DevOps actually. So I mean, if you're trying to say that whether he should learn Chef and Puppet, I mean, I'm not sure actually, because that is an entirely different field. So this is a kind of operations automation, fine. So you may, as a tester, you may not try and want to basically do the deployment. Is DevOps consultant is required to transform? Yeah, somebody was saying something. Sorry. So is DevOps consultant required to transform traditional SDLC to DevOps? I think it is important that if you have a good agile coach who can help you to move towards DevOps, he must be coming from the technical background so that he can understand the automation related ideas. Um, but again, the person who is just having the automation knowledge or the development knowledge will not be the right candidate for as a consultant. Fine. So how we can configure checklist when moving applications to production using DevOps? Um, Configure checklist. So I think basically what you need to do is uh, you try to see like I think what first thing you can do is you can do the value stream mapping. So that means like from the time the news story or the feature comes into your bucket until the time it goes to the production, what are the different steps and how much time each takes, where the problems really happens, try to measure them. So you may find that there may be a lot of delays, but activity time will be maybe less, fine. So try to see like with that, like where you having the bottlenecks, and then basically what you can do is uh, so then what you can do is you try to see the low hanging fruits, or the bottlenecks which basically try to help you in your pipeline, uh, fix that. And in order to fix the bottleneck, there may be a lot of ideas. So maybe you may fix some bottlenecks with some kind of change in the process. Some bottlenecks can be fixed by doing the automation. So you need to see based on the bottleneck what needs to be done. So it again, I want to emphasize that automation is not the only thing which you need to do. Automation is maybe part of it, but sometimes, for example, like somewhere you are taking 30 days to get the clearance from somebody. So it's just a change in the process. You don't need to do from the technical point of view, but it gives you a huge dividend if you understand that. So you need to see like there is a bottleneck, how to resolve that in totality, and then you resolve that. Then is there anything else? As a leader manager, how we need to go with DevOps? Is it something need to understand the DevOps tools, how and where to use and manage the DevOps kind of project? I think the tooling comes very late in the game. First of all, I think we need to really understand how, as a leaders, we need to work together. So in many organizations, what I've seen is that people start, for example, implementing the agile, but agile implementation remains up to the team members only. So there is, I mean, people don't find a role for the leaders how to contribute there. And I think the from the lean standpoint, the leaders are the founders, or the founding stones of moving towards, for example, DevOps, towards DevOps. So what they need to do is, like, they need to see like where the bottlenecks are, how they can help in resolving them. Sometimes the bottleneck is not in the hand of the team. So that's where the leadership comes in the picture. They try to resolve the impediments and try to help the teams in resolving those bottlenecks. So that's where, I mean, this leadership role comes into picture. So with that, I would say that the starting point is the value stream mapping, identifying the bottlenecks, and then try to mitigate them using processes, using automation or whatever. Uh, then what is the DevOps learning path for system administrator or technical consultant and its implementation in the project? So system administrator, I would say, actually, I'm not a expert in the system administration's point of view, but what people are doing these days is they are learning different ideas to make sure that with one single click, they should be able to deploy the application to the production. And in that, certain tools like Chef and Puppet, deployment pipeline like Jenkins are helping them. And then there are different monitoring tools as well. With that, they are able to see like what is happening on their site, and how to monitor the site. Fine. So there are different ideas like Chaos Monkey, in which you basically kill your servers and then see what can be the mitigation steps. So there are a lot of ideas which can be used to as part of the system administrator uh, from DevOps point of view. Okay, think uh, I think this is it for now. I hope this session was useful to you guys. Um, and as I said, like, it's just a tip of the iceberg. There is a good amount of understanding needs to be done, more on the DevOps, um, to implement that. Agile coach and DevOps coach. I think Agile coach and DevOps. I mean, the Agile coach can become DevOps coach as long as he also has certain understanding from a technical standpoint as well. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you very much for coming here, attending this webinar. I hope this was useful.